A poor cowboy dares to love the daughter of the richest rancher in Dry Creek, only to be mocked and challenged with an impossible task. Richard Coleman, proud and unyielding, sets a cruel wager, convinced no man could ever tame his wild stallion Devil. Yet fate had its own design, and Ethan Miller's unshakable spirit turned humiliation into triumph. But just wait until you hear how this battle of pride and love ended, and why justice at last prevailed. The late afternoon sun poured across the Texas plains, painting the horizon in copper and fire. In the town of Dry Creek, dust clung to every boardwalk and rail, and gossip drifted quicker than the wind. By the time Ethan Miller rode in, word of Richard Coleman's challenge was already on every tongue. Ethan's arrival stirred little more than sidelong glances. His hat was sun-bleached, his shirt patched at the elbows, and the leather of his saddle bore the cracks of years spent under merciless skies. He was no stranger to the hard road, moving cattle, fixing fences, sleeping under stars instead of roofs. Many dismissed him with a glance, for in Dry Creek a man's worth was measured by land, not by character. And Ethan had no land. Yet there was something in his posture that unsettled the townsfolk. A quiet steadiness, the kind of calm that didn't come from arrogance, but from a spirit tested by hardship. It was that steadiness that caught Abigail Coleman's eye more than once. She had grown up surrounded by men eager to prove themselves with loud boasts or flashy displays, but Ethan's silence spoke louder. Her father, Richard Coleman, noticed it too, but where Abigail saw strength, Richard saw a threat to his authority. The rancher was a man carved by success and hardened by the belief that only wealth made one deserving. He ruled his land and household with the same hand he used on his cattle, firm, unyielding, and without mercy for weakness. In his eyes, Ethan was nothing more than a wanderer with ambition too large for his boots. That evening, as the townsfolk gathered in front of the Coleman ranch house, Richard made his disdain plain. Standing tall on the porch with Abigail just behind him, he let his voice carry. My daughter will not throw her future away on a man with empty pockets and calloused hands. She is meant for more than that. The words drew snickers from a few men leaning on the railings. Ethan, standing near his tired horse, didn't flinch. His jaw tightened, his eyes steady. Richard, savoring the moment, let the silence stretch before adding, but since you've dared to look at her as if you had a claim, I'll give you a chance. You want to prove yourself? Break my stallion, Devil. Tame him, ride him, master him. No man has lasted more than a breath on his back. Do this, and I'll allow you to marry Abigail. The challenge rolled through the crowd like thunder. Some gasped, others laughed outright. Devil was the wildest horse in 3 counties, a beast that had thrown seasoned riders and nearly crippled one. Everyone knew Coleman's words were not an offer but a sentence, a spectacle meant to shame. Abigail's hand tightened around the porch rail. She wanted to speak, to object, but the weight of her father's will pressed her silent. Her gaze found Ethan, searching his face for hesitation, fear, anything that might let him walk away, but he gave her none of it. Ethan stepped forward, tipped his hat slightly toward Richard, a gesture that was neither acceptance nor refusal, but acknowledgement of the gauntlet laid before him. Then, without a word, he turned his eyes back to Abigail. For a moment, the world seemed to still. In that glance was a promise, quiet, but unshakable. He would try, no matter the cost. The crowd murmured, some shaking their heads, others already betting on how long the cowboy would last before being thrown. Dust rose as the wind shifted, and with it came a sense that something larger than pride had just taken root. What began as mockery was now the seed of a trial that would test not only Ethan's courage, but the very meaning of strength and love in Dry Creek. The morning broke clear and sharp, the kind of day when even the air felt brittle. Long before the sun reached its height, the townsfolk of Dry Creek began to gather by the corrals on Coleman's ranch. Word had spread, and with it came the promise of spectacle, a poor cowboy pitted against the wildest stallion anyone had ever seen. Devil, the black stallion, was already in the pen, muscles coiled under his glossy hide, his eyes rolling white as he slammed against the fence rails with the force of a storm. Each snort and kick sent the dust flying, and with it a hush fell over those who had come. Few dared stand too close, for the horse seemed less like an animal and more like a living tempest. Ethan Miller stepped into the corral with quiet steps, carrying only a rope and the weight of the wager that had been set before him. His boots sank into the churned dirt, and though his shoulders ached from the day before, he walked as though the ground itself steadied him. There was no bravado, no swagger, just a calm persistence that unsettled more than if he had shouted a challenge. From the railings, men whispered their bets. He won't last a blink. That horse will crush him. Poor fool's got nothing to lose. But not everyone laughed. As Ethan approached the stallion, a new feeling began to settle over the crowd, something quieter, heavier. There was no mistaking the danger, but there was also no mistaking the resolve etched across the cowboy's face. Abigail watched from the fence line, her fingers clutching the wood so tightly her knuckles whitened. She had seen men try to ride Devil before, strong men, proud men, men her father had handpicked. All had failed. Yet in Ethan's patience, in the way he did not rush the stallion, but instead lowered his voice and spoke in calm tones, she sensed something different. Hours stretched into what felt like days. Devil fought with all the fury of the plains, rearing, striking, hurling Ethan into the dirt more than once. Each time the crowd gasped. Some turned away, expecting the cowboy to stay down. Yet every time Ethan rose again. Bloodless dust streaked his shirt, sweat darkened his hat brim, but his eyes never left the horse. And slowly, so slowly it was almost imperceptible, something shifted. The stallion's wild fury began to falter, not out of exhaustion alone, but out of recognition. Ethan was not trying to break him with force. He was trying to meet him with will. A boy near the fence tugged at his father's sleeve. "But he's not fighting the horse, he's talking to him." The father had no answer, only silence. By late afternoon, even the loudest skeptics had gone quiet. The laughter that had once filled the air was gone, replaced by the creak of the rails and the pounding of hooves. And in that silence, the townsfolk found themselves holding their breath with each step Ethan took back toward the stallion. What had begun as a cruel game now carried the weight of something larger. Pride, mockery, even the promise of marriage, all faded before the simple truth rising in front of them. A man with nothing but his spirit was standing against the impossible, and somehow impossibility was beginning to bend. And as the sun dipped lower, painting the corral in shadows and fire, Abigail's lips moved soundlessly, as if whispering a prayer that only the horse and Ethan might hear. The sun was dipping low, and the corral glowed in shades of fire and shadow. Dust hung in the air, stirred by Devil's restless hooves. Ethan stood in the center, bruised and weary, but steady. The stallion still trembled with fury, yet his eyes no longer blazed with defiance. Something had shifted. The crowd was hushed now, every whisper gone. Hours earlier they had laughed, but now they leaned in, breathless. Even Richard Coleman, arms crossed on the porch, watched with narrowed eyes, his pride tested by what he could no longer dismiss. Ethan moved with deliberate calm, settling the saddle across Devil's back. The stallion shuddered, muscles coiling like steel. But when Ethan swung into the seat, the uproar never came. Devil reared once, the earth shaking beneath him, and then, miraculously, slowed. The furious bucking became a powerful stride, circling the pen with Ethan balanced firm and unshaken. A gasp rippled through the crowd, followed by cheers that grew louder with each passing lap. The impossible had become real. The untamable horse had accepted its rider. Abigail pressed her hands to her lips, tears bright in her eyes. Ethan's glance toward her was brief, but it carried the weight of a vow fulfilled. Richard's voice broke the clamor at last. Rough, unwilling, but honest. "You've done what no man could. You've proven yourself. A man who can ride that horse may stand as my equal." The cheer that followed rolled across the plains like thunder. Ethan slid from the saddle, exhausted yet unbowed. Abigail ran to his side, her hand slipping into his. In that single touch lay the victory greater than any prize. For Ethan, it was never only about the wager. It was about dignity, about love, and about proving that true strength lies not in wealth but in the unyielding spirit of a man who refuses to give up.